It was one of sport's darkest episodes.
A much bigger scandal with Russian athletes than we knew.
Following the Sochi Winter Olympics of 2014, Russia was proved to have carried out a vast state-sponsored doping operation.
Conspiracy to conceal positive tests.
Widespread doping by Russian athletes at the Sochi Olympics.
I don't think anyone was expecting the gravity in terms of the findings, in terms of the cheating.
The scandal didn't just expose an epidemic of foul play. It called into question the credibility of a system that's supposed to guard against doping and protect honest athletes.
It still smells of bias towards the interests of sports governing bodies to the detriment of the athletes.
Doping is definitely bad for business, and that's used as an illegitimate excuse to brush it under the rug or ignore it completely.
So, is there a lack of will to catch the cheats? Doping isn't just a Russian problem, it's a global problem. In 2011, an anonymous survey asked more than 1,200 athletes whether they'd used performance-enhancing drugs. The result, which was kept quiet for 6 years, was astonishing. 44% admitted to doping. But typically, only 1 to 2% of samples test positive.
Our career, our livelihood, our name is based on making sure that we stay clean and we compete fairly.
Callum Skinner is a retired track cyclist, a gold and silver medalist at the 2016 Rio Olympics. Now, he campaigns to keep doping out of sports.
What we have to do is to send out a clear message that if you do dope, it comes with negative consequences.
Just like the Olympic motto, athletes want to be faster, higher, stronger. Performance-enhancing drugs promise just that. But all drugs come with health risks, and crucially, they tip the balance in competition. The sports governing bodies, especially the International Olympic Committee, or the IOC, say they want to stop the cheats. But Antoine Duval, a leading sports lawyer, believes they are part of the problem.
They have an incentive of being seen as doing a lot, but they don't have an incentive to catch a lot of cheats because that would damage the image of their sport.
Back in 1999, the IOC declared war on doping. It created the World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA.
WADA would be very useful for the fight in the future against doping.
WADA was set up to be the anti-doping watchdog and to write the rulebook that would dictate best practice, globally. But WADA's independence is questionable. Rob Keeler has unparalleled insight. As the former deputy director at WADA, he knows the pressures facing the agency.
As WADA became stronger, there was resistance from the Olympic movement, where there was a desire to have more control. When you lose control, you lose the ability to dictate the outcomes.
50% of WADA's funding comes from 190 governments, and the other half comes from the IOC. And WADA's average annual budget of $27 million is less than 2% of the IOC's revenue in an average year.
We need to understand that WADA as an institution is weak. It's basically a naked legislator. It produces rules that it has absolutely no power and capacity to enforce.
WADA has around 120 employees. Only 7 of them are tasked with conducting investigations into doping schemes worldwide.
So it's extremely dependent on goodwill.
With no power to enforce, WADA relies on the national anti-doping agencies and sports federations to do drug testing. But different countries have different means, ability, and, yes, political will to catch dopers.
And that's why the Russian could run a very neat front organization that was apparently in compliance with those rules, while systematically bypassing them.
The 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics were a huge success for the Russian team. 2 years later, and just weeks before the opening ceremony at Rio 2016, something happened that no one had anticipated. Grigory Rodchenkov, the head of Russia's anti-doping laboratory, turned whistleblower. His admissions, captured in the Oscar-winning Netflix documentary Icarus, thrust Russia's actions into the public consciousness like never before.
I was helping to facilitate one of the most elaborate doping ploys in sport history.
WADA had been investigating allegations of Russian doping since 2014, but it wasn't until July 2016 that it published a report, conducted by independent lawyer Richard McLaren.
The Moscow laboratory operated within a state-directed, fail-safe system.
Russia tampered with urine samples of athletes in a thriller-like cover-up operation.
Russia was found to have mouse holes to slip samples through in the middle of the night and switch urine samples.
They even mixed in salt and coffee to contaminate doped samples. More than 1,000 Russian athletes were accused of doping. Russia was categorical in its denial.
Никогда не было, нет, и, надеюсь, никогда не будет никакой государственной системы поддержки допинга.
WADA was determined that Russia should pay the full price.
The WADA Executive Committee made strong recommendations that the Russian Olympic Committee be banned from the Rio Olympic Games. I recall being so proud of the organization I worked for.
But the IOC rejected WADA's recommendations.
The basic and the difficult question we had to answer was, can you hold any athlete responsible for the wrongdoing of the government of his or her country?
The IOC allowed individual athletes to appeal against the decision at the Court of Arbitration for Sport, or CAS. The result? Over 2/3 of the Russian team were allowed to participate. 2 years later, the IOC cleared 169 Russian athletes to take part in the Winter Olympics. But were those outcomes entirely due to concern about the rights of individual athletes? The answer may lie in a complex web of politics and power in sports.
Russia is a powerhouse in sport. They provide a lot of money into sport. They host a lot of events in the sport.
And there's this.
Russian politics and sports are very often enmeshed.
Alexander Zhukov, Russia's deputy prime minister, doubled up as president of the Russian Olympic Committee. Pavel Kolobkov was deputy minister of sports and part of WADA. And then there's Vitaly Mutko. He was sports minister during the Sochi scandal, but he wasn't sacked for this embarrassing episode. In fact, he was promoted to deputy prime minister. But placing influential people in positions of power isn't just a Russian affair. The IOC has two bodies that are predominantly dedicated to fighting doping: WADA and the Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS. Like WADA, CAS was also established by the IOC. These two bodies are meant to be independent, but an intricate network of rules and people has raised questions.
Well, I think it is a very small community in terms of sport. There's a lot of conflicts of interest where people are filling different roles.
3 senior IOC members, Thomas Bach, Craig Reedy, and John Coates, have held key positions at the CAS and at WADA, often at the same time. And the list doesn't end there.
Should the president of WADA also be an IOC member, where there's a divergence of loyalties?
You don't see the president of the US sitting at the same time in the Supreme Court. This is not the way it should work.
This inner circle mentality means that the IOC maintains a tight grip on the bodies it had set up as independent.
The IOC is an elitist club of the highest kind. All those executives of sports raise at least the suspicion that there might be something foul.
Despite its $5.7 billion revenue per Olympic cycle, the IOC is registered as a non-profit organization and benefits from Switzerland's lenient association laws, which means it has a lot of leeway in how it runs itself, and raises the question, is anyone governing the governing bodies?
We have private associations that are exercising government governance, and they're proud of it. But they claim it without the strings that traditional public authorities, in democratic countries at least, are subjected to, which are transparency, accountability, etc.
So, can anyone hold the IOC to account?
I put some of the blame on sponsors and broadcasters.
73% of the IOC's revenue comes through TV rights.
They're the ones supporting and promoting the Olympic Games. Surely there should be a responsibility from the broadcasters that are sponsoring, from the sponsors, to demand change.
The IOC insists there's no inherent conflict of interest in its relationship with WADA, and has stated its desire to make testing more independent from sports organizations and governments. It claims that a $20 million investment into anti-doping research and the protection of clean athletes is now bearing fruit. But some athletes believe this should just be the start.
As soon as athletes start to lose confidence in the system, they start to think, how can I win if it's not a level playing field? People will always find ways of trying to cheat, but what we need to do is get better at catching them. And I think one of the key ways that we can do that is if sports governance officials wake up to their responsibility to athletes, their responsibility to protect fair and clean sport, their responsibility to protect the welfare of the athletes, and their responsibility for athletes to have faith in the anti-doping system.
If you want more information on doping in sports, click the link opposite where you can find further Economist coverage and also all the research, data, and studies that we used to make the film. If you enjoyed what you saw, and I hope you did, then click that subscribe button and also click that little bell next to it and you'll get a notification next time we publish a film. Thanks for watching.